You know what? Since we do have the Rangers with us, I'll catch you up on what we talked about last week. I'm doing this thing called house rules, that every house has certain rules that are specific to your house. And so last night we even looked at some of the Belk house rules. Cody sent me a picture of the house rules that you can see if you actually go to the Belk home. You can see them there on the wall and know what's important to their family, what values they have, because of their rules that their family follows. So there's some rules that every family follows. Rules like, tell the truth and stuff like that. There's some rules that you'd find no matter what family you went to. But then there's going to be some things that are specific to your home. What's a rule that's specific to your house?
There's no bringing a rock in and just rolling it.
That's a good rule. And maybe not all families need that rule, but that one benefited at your house, right? Okay.
Quit climbing on my barbecue grill.
Quit climbing on my barbecue grill. Okay. So you can see that there's some situations where your own home has to have certain family rules. Well, what I'm talking about is when you're a Christian, you are part of the family of God. You're brought into the family of God. And so what Jesus said is that there's certain rules that he wants us to follow if we're part of his family. And you'll find that there's a lot of people out there who say, it's really popular to say, oh, I'm a Christian. Oh, I'm friends with Jesus. Jesus is my homeboy. You'll see people saying stuff like that, but they don't actually follow what he says. And so what I'm talking about tonight is one of the first things that Jesus said is when he talked about murder. I felt like it was really important for me to preach a sermon against murder. And so I thought it might be, it's becoming a problem in the youth group and we need to crack down on it. No, not really.
Yeah, I already shot you 6 times today.
No, the reason is that in the Old Testament of the Bible, they had the 10 commandments. And the 6th commandment was, thou shalt not murder. And so I talked a little bit about that last week. And, there's a difference in murder and killing because the Bible doesn't say thou shalt not kill. Sometimes there's situations where if the government has to, use the death penalty or a soldier goes to war or something like that, or self-defense, there's certain situations where a killing might be justified. What murder is taking away someone's life unfairly, taking away a life that you do not have the right to. That's what murder is. And so in the Old Testament it said, you shall not murder. So that was the Bible's take on it. Then Jesus came along, and we read this verse last week, but I didn't even read the whole verse because there was so much to talk about on it. That's why this is part 2 right here. There was so much to talk about on this verse, I didn't even finish reading it. So, how to destroy humans with your mind, part 2. Jesus said, you've heard that it was said to people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. So Raka, are you going to ask what that means? No. Raka is a phrase, I think it's in Hebrew, and it basically means to call somebody empty-headed. Like to say, oh, they're an idiot. Oh, they don't know anything. That's basically what it means to say Raka. I didn't even read that part last week because there was so much. So we talked last week about anger. And Jesus said that when you're angry with someone and you just let it fester in your heart and turn into hatred, then that's basically the same as murdering someone in your heart. Because he said you're destroying that person in your mind. You're just destroying that person in your heart. You might not be physically killing them, but in your heart, when you just hate someone and you just let it fester, he says that's like killing them in your mind. And Jesus cares about what's going on in our mind. He cares about what's going on in our heart. He doesn't want us going around destroying people in our heads. So he says, don't even call people names. Don't even call them Raka. I don't know how much of an insult Raka was back then, but what it means is someone's empty-headed. He says, don't just go around calling people names. Because that is a form of hating a person. And that's it. And hating a person is a form of killing them. So he says, don't even go there. Yeah.
I have never said Raka in my life.
That's good. Yeah, we've probably never used the phrase Raka before because it's an old language word. But we shouldn't call people names like other types of names too that people call each other a lot. Yeah. Yes. All these things are things we just don't want to say to people because it's not nice. So listen, I'm not worried about anybody in here committing murder.
Are you sure about that?
Frog killer.
Okay, I killed the frog on the Undertale game, but other than that, I'm not concerned about anyone in here being a murderer. But here's what, and I don't think Jesus was concerned about the people he's really talking to being murderers, because there's not very many people like that out there. But he says, I don't even want you on the path to murder. I don't even want you getting on the pathway, the road that leads to that. He's not saying you're going to go eventually kill someone, even if you dislike them, even if you hate them. But he doesn't want us even stepping on the path that leads to those things. And he says it starts with name calling, and then it goes into being angry and hating them and all that. So I want to show you the path tonight. I want to show you the path. And I've got 6 points. I usually do like 2 or 3 points in a sermon, but I've got 6 points tonight. So get comfortable. No, even though I'm doing 6 points, I'm going to move through them.
6 points, we have 10.
I'm going to move through them really quickly, okay? So there's this quote from Star Wars. And this is one of I always thought this was kind of a real cheesy quote, but it goes with my sermon a little bit, so I'm going to play it because Star Wars has been my thing for like literally decades.
Same here.
Really? Decades for you too? So you need to really appreciate that I don't force Star Wars into like every sermon I do. But
How feel you?
Cold, sir.
Afraid, are you?
No, sir.
See through you. We can.
Be mindful of your feelings.
Your thoughts dwell on your mother.
I miss her.
Afraid to lose her, I think. Hmm?
What does that got to do with anything?
Everything. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. I sense much fear in you.
okay, so what in the world is... First of all, does anyone notice that the Yoda puppet is like way worse in 1999 than it looked back in the 80s?
That's a puppet?
That's a puppet right there. It's like not even as good looking as the old... Anyway, but that even when I was 9 and I heard that, and he's like, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? Because that's, even when I was 9, I was like, I don't think that's exactly how it works. Now, Jesus here, in the verses I read, he did give us the pathway to the dark side. He did actually show us what leads someone there. And like I said, I'm not worried about you killing someone, but I don't even want you on the pathway. So here's the pathway to murder. Okay, what Jesus said first is that murder comes from hate. That's my first point there. Murder comes from hate. Has anyone ever heard of like first-degree murder, second-degree murder? You've heard of that before? Okay, so what's the difference in first and second-degree murder? The Bible actually makes the distinction too. So first-degree murder, that's like when someone says, I'm going to go kill that person. And then they go there and they do it. When somebody does that, that's called first-degree murder. That's like the worst kind of murder because it means that they knew what they wanted to do before they got into that situation. They went there and they did it. So that's first-degree murder. A lot of times that will get somebody the death penalty for doing something like that. Now, what second-degree murder is something different. Second-degree murder means that you're with someone and maybe you get in a disagreement and you like push each other around or get into a little fight, something like that. You're not trying to kill them, but something happens and they die. Okay? That's still murder. But we call that second-degree murder. And that means you didn't really mean to kill them, but it's just something that happened because you got in a fight or whatever. So it's still really awful, of course. It's not as serious. It won't get you the death penalty. Even the Bible said that won't get you the death penalty. First-degree murder is what will get someone the death penalty. So the Bible even makes that distinction. But how does the Bible make that distinction? Well, this is what God said back in the Old Testament. He said, how do we tell the difference in first-degree murder and second-degree murder? Like if two people, if they get in a fight and one of them ends up dead or whatever happens, one person kills another, how do we determine if it was first or second degree? Well, they said, do we have evidence that the murderer hated the person he killed? And what God said was, if he hated the person, then it was probably first-degree murder. Because God was saying hate leads to murder. Murder comes from hate. He said, if you guys look and they were always friends, they were best buddies, and something happened and the guy died, That's how God would say it probably wasn't first-degree murder then if there was no evidence of hate. So they would look for, did this person hate this other person? And that's how they would tell if it was first or second-degree murder. Jesus comes around and he says, murder comes from hate. I'll give you an example of that. If you want to look down at the verses that we have on your bulletins, I didn't put them on the PowerPoint tonight. They're on your bulletin. The verses from Genesis 37, Joseph had all these brothers, but Joseph was his dad's very favorite son. And he had like 11 or 12 other brothers, okay? And yet, Joseph was the favorite. So the brothers were not okay with that. And they weren't mad at the dad. They were mad at Joseph. They said they hated Joseph. Right. So when his brothers saw that their father loved him, that he loved Joseph more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And it says later on, Joseph starts having like dreams that are dreams from God, and they get jealous again. It says they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So they said to one another, look, this dreamer's coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We'll see what becomes of his dreams. So they hated Joseph, and that led them to decide, we're going to come up with this plan to kill Joseph. Hate leads to murder. Murder comes from hate. Now here's what else Jesus said. Second point. Hate comes from anger. Okay? Hate comes from anger. So anger precedes hate, and then hate precedes murder. But hate comes from anger. And I got another story here. Cain and Abel. This was the very first murder that happened in the Bible. And you can look at the verses there again. They're from Genesis 4. It said, the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very, what? Triggered. That's great. He was very angry, it says, and his countenance fell. And it came to pass while they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. Okay? Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to murder. So anger is an emotion, and we can't always control our emotions, right? Like, we get angry sometimes. Sometimes there's good things to be angry about. I kind of covered this last week. Anger is an emotion. It's an understandable emotion, and we can't always control our anger. The important thing is what you do with your anger, how you resolve your anger, okay? Because imagine that you're like a pot, okay? And your pot fills up with water, and just the more life heats you up, what's going to happen to the water in your pot? It's going to boil, yeah. The hotter life gets you, the more it's going to just make you boil over. So what we got to do is get the water, and it'll eventually evaporate. But if we don't want it boiling, we've got to get the water out of our pot. So whenever you get angry, you start feeling yourself fill up with that anger. You need to resolve it and get it out of your system as fast as you can, or it just keeps building and building, and you don't resolve it, and then it's going to boil when life gets you hot. If your pot has no water in it, it does not matter how high you turn up that fire. There's nothing that's going to boil because you got all the water out. So that's what we got to do. We got to get the water out before we explode in anger. We got to resolve our anger. Where does anger come from? Okay, anger comes from an offense. An offense is when somebody does you wrong. An offense could mean that they don't meet your expectations or that they do something against you. Sometimes an offense can be a misunderstanding. Okay, when there's a misunderstanding, sometimes we get angry about that. We don't see the whole picture. We get mad at someone. So when you get offended by a person, try to always remember it could be a misunderstanding before you get too angry. But an offense is whenever someone does you wrong. Like, let's say you went home tonight. Luke never talked to me at church tonight. He talked to everyone else in the room, but he didn't talk to me. He must have something against me. And you went home mad about it.
Trying to burn my eye.
I did try to burn out your eye, but I thought you deserved it. So,
God, he's lost.
an offense is whenever you're upset with somebody. And hey, think, it could be a misunderstanding. It could be something else. So, whenever you're offended by someone, really what you want to do before you let your anger get out of control, try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay? Try to say, maybe it could have been a misunderstanding, and think of maybe when they said that, they didn't really mean it this way, they meant it that way, but they said it this way, and they phrased it poorly, but that's not really what they meant. Give people the benefit of the doubt, because think about it. Do you want people to give you the benefit of the doubt? Do you want people to be gentle with you before they get mad at you and like give you a chance to explain yourself or give you a chance? You know, we want people to be patient with us. So we need to be patient with other people and give them the benefit of the doubt. Because if you don't, if you just kind of sit there and you're thinking, well, I was offended by them, and you just kind of think about it and dwell on it, and you just keep replaying it in your mind again and again and again, and just keep thinking about it and thinking about it, what you're doing, Jesus said, you're destroying that person in your mind. You're destroying that human being in your mind. And it's not what we want to do. That puts us on this pathway where we get angry, and that anger, when we just keep dwelling on it, turns to hatred. And then it's probably not going to go to murder, but I'm just saying, don't even get on the path. Don't even tiptoe around on the path and say, well, I'm just going to stew about this forever. So the way that we deal with our anger is important. The way we resolve our anger is important. How do we break this sequence? How do we get out of this sequence? We can't always stop when someone's going to offend us. We can't always stop that. Offenses are going to come. Okay? We can't always stop getting angry. Anger is an emotion. We can't control our emotions all the time. We're going to get mad sometimes. So what do we do to not let the anger turn to hate? What's the other path? Okay, I want to show you that. What we really want to end up at is love. Love comes from forgiveness. Love is the kind of relationship that we want with other people, not killing them. Okay? So, love is the ultimate goal. How do you love someone who's offended you? Well, first of all, love comes from forgiveness. And the Bible's word for forgiveness means release. Okay? So, it means that you're just going to let them go. You've been trapping them in your mind. You've been replaying this event. You've been thinking about this thing that made you angry. And you're going to release them, and you're going to say, I'm not going to think about it anymore. I'm not going to bring it up again in a couple weeks. I'm not going to dwell on this forever. I'm going to just release this person and move on from it. I'm not even going to call them mean names anymore. Like, instead of beating this person up in my mind and destroying them, I'm going to release them. That's what the word forgiveness actually means in the Bible, to release someone. It doesn't mean that the person's changed. It does not mean that the person's better. Because forgiveness is not like about them so much. It's about you releasing them for yourself. I can remember one time I had a big disagreement with someone, and I was really, really, really mad at them for like about 3 weeks. I was really, really mad at this person because I thought they had done me wrong. And I didn't really talk to them that much for about 3 weeks, okay? And then I was at this church revival event, and they were there too. And I knew, like, at this thing, God's going to tell me, hey, you need to forgive them. You need to move past this situation. So, like, I knew, even though I've been carrying this anger around, and I didn't want to forgive them, I was like, no, they don't deserve to be forgiven yet, you know. I just kind of held on to it in my head. But after a few weeks, and I see them at this thing, and they're, like, doing the altar call, and I see them, like, going up and responding to it, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm sure this has been bugging them too. And, you know, I went over to them, and I said, hey, listen, about that situation from a few weeks ago, I forgive you for it. You know, I'm moved past it. It's okay.
It seemed that he forgot your name and was in control of who you were.
He knew who I was, and he knew he had done wrong. He's like, oh, I forgot about that weeks ago. I'm like, no, I didn't like yell at him, but I'm like, you know, the first thought in my head is, I've been thinking about this nonstop. But you know what? I was okay because even though like they were still kind of being a jerk about it, and they're just kind of still blowing it off. You know, like for me, that was like a big thing. I forgive you. I didn't cry, but I'm like, you know, that was finally me moving past, getting past over that big hump. And they were just acting like they didn't even care. But you know what? It's not about them. It's not about that person. Forgiveness is about you and like getting it out of your system, the release of that. So move past it and release. How do you forgive someone? How do you release them? Okay, where does forgiveness come from? Forgiveness comes from mercy.
That you don't use.
Sometimes I use mercy on the other characters, just that dumb frog and his friends. Okay, so in your bulletins, I have one more verse there, and it's from Matthew chapter 5. And this is what Jesus is saying here about forgiveness and murder and hate and all this. He says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Okay? So this is why, like, when I said I was at this, this church revival service earlier, And I said I hadn't forgiven this person yet. It's because I knew when I was at this service, I'm like, as long as I'm holding on to this anger and not releasing this person, I know I'm not going to get very far with God tonight. And I wanted to at this service. So I thought, I need to go release this person and move past this thing. So I knew I had to forgive him that night. Because Jesus is saying there in those verses, if you're holding on to anger or hatred or resentment towards someone, and you come to church, but it's still like all you can think about is that person, and you can't get past it, Jesus says, go make things right with that person. Because you're hitting a ceiling on how far you can go with God until you make it right with this person. So forgiveness comes from mercy. Last point. Where does mercy come from? Okay, because we're here at anger. And I'm saying, how do we resolve our anger? Like, how do we get going towards the mercy track instead of the hate track whenever we're angry with someone? How do we resolve our anger? Okay, where's the mercy going to come from? Mercy comes from God. Mercy comes from God. Just like God released us from our sins, God released us from our sins, so we need to release other people from their sins. We need to be willing to get past when other people make mistakes. And the way that we find it in ourselves to do that is that you just think, whenever I became a Christian, God took everything bad I've ever done. He took all the bad stuff I've done, and he rolled it up into a ball, and he tied an anchor to it, and he dropped it in the deepest ocean, never to think about it again. He put all of every bad thing you've ever done, and he put it on a rocket ship, and he sent it off into space, and it's never coming back. Okay? When God forgave you of your sins, he says he looks at you, and he's totally past it all. He's released you from everything bad you've done. So when we think about how much God forgives us, then we think about some piddly little thing that we're mad at someone else about. And we think, man, when I look at how much God forgave me, when I think of how much that God forgave me, I can let it go for whatever this person did. That's where mercy comes from. If someone's not a Christian, if they've never received God's mercy, they might not be able to give God's mercy. But if you know what God's done for you, if you've accepted God's mercy, you can give it to other people, and you can forgive them, and then you can love them. The last thing I'll mention is, I was talking earlier about that shooting that happened at the church in Texas. Where was that in Texas? Was it in Houston?
Yeah.
Like 26 people died outside of San Antonio. Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, it was down in Texas. And the person who did this, he had this hate. He was angry. He was an atheist. Like, they went to his Facebook, and it was full of hateful things about Christians. He was an atheist. He didn't like God. Okay? And he let his anger turn into hatred. And then he let that hatred compel him to go to this church, where I guess it was his ex-wife's church or something, his grandma, and shot and killed all those people, okay? Because he let this hate and anger fester up inside of him, and he went and did something like that. And I was thinking about that this week. And about this, there was another church shooting a couple years ago where a guy went to a church that was mostly full of black people, because this was like a black person church, I don't know what you call it. But he hated black people because he was very racist, and he went in there and shot, and I think he killed 8 or 9 people there. Okay? Same thing. Anger, hate, turning into murder. And what I remember about that story is that the families of those victims, this was like back in 2015, the families were being interviewed on the news. And the news people were asking them, like, how are you ever going to get past this? And they said, well, we've already forgiven the guy who did this shooting. They said, we've already forgiven him. The news people didn't understand that. And they thought, well, okay, you're just emotional right now. But they said, how could you forgive someone who had done something so awful, like they killed your family members while they were in church? I said, how could you ever forgive someone for that? How could you ever show somebody like that mercy? And they said, because God showed us mercy. And since they knew about the mercy of God and they'd received the mercy of God, they were even able to extend that to someone who had committed murder. So, whenever we're angry with someone, before it starts going down the hate track, remember what God's done for you. Remember God's mercy. Let that lead to forgiveness. Let that lead to love. That's where we want to go with it. Okay, it's about 8 o'clock. I'm going to let us go out for tonight. You guys were amazing tonight. You were like really quiet during the sermon.
Yeah, I wasn't very funny today.
Did I not have enough puns for you in the sermon? I'm sorry. I'll try to get a few more. I know Mikey appreciates those.